Okay, this is just sort of the next version of our RPG game. And I made a couple of changes, but this basic change is about adding the navigation into the game. And also one of the things I did, we were, before calling show dialogue, but sometimes that has issues with closing windows. I've noticed when I use a graphical interface with my PowerShell scripts. So I recommend using this method, system.windows.forms application, and then scope into run, and just pass in as the argument your main form or the form that you want to load. And if you use this method, you can use both. You can call show dialog if you want, but if you use this method, I think you will have a much better time, much more stability in terms of using graphical Windows forms with your PowerShell scripts. Okay. That being said, let's take a look at how we do some basic navigation with a GUI interface, right? So we added some globals in. This is just like we did with the console version. And the purpose of these, they're just integer constants. But we wanted to give them a programmer or human-friendly name. So for center 1, C1, north 1, N1, S1, E1, W1, and then we could have N2, S2, E2, and so forth as we code our map and as our map gets bigger, okay? And we need a couple of globals, the player's choice, to pass around to different functions. And I'm going to use this global here, location, to keep track of. We'll create a function called switchboard, and that'll be how we do navigation in our game. And then we can manipulate and change this global inside of different functions from our GUI form, and that's how they'll be able to walk around the game, okay? So I have event handlers for my buttons on my form, right? So in this case, I have navigation buttons, B north, B south, B east, B west. And then they go and they call navigation action, and they manipulate or set the value of choice, okay? And if I were to look at that, you can see that all that does is call this function here, switchboard, and then it clears the text field and changes the value of choice. So switchboard is sort of the game engine. It controls the game flow, right? I keep calling this function over and over from other functions based on what the player decides to do. If they decide to take a direction, north, south, east, west. If they decide to pick up an inventory item. If the game's in introduction mode versus in play mode versus an ending mode, or they load or save. I have to manipulate this as sort of a central. It's not a loop. There's not a repetition structure here, but this is event-based programming now. Remember when you add a GUI, we said you're no longer doing, that procedural type of programming that hovers and loops at the console. Now it's truly event-based. It's all random based on what the user clicks in any random order in that form. So even though it doesn't look like a loop or repetition structure, this is sort of our game engine now. This is sort of our navigation engine for walking around the map. And we're just going to manipulate, right? We change the value of the global location. And based on that value, we go and we call these functions that walk from function to function, okay? So that's what these buttons do here, north, south, east, west. They call navigate action, and then navigate action calls switchboard, right? And then we have use, attack, defend, look, and go. Haven't done much with these yet. They're just sitting there on my interface waiting. Nor with these yet. Sitting on my interface there waiting. But the go button does something, and it calls go action. And let me go search up, and if we call go action, what do? We take input from that text field, and we put it in this choice variable, our global choice. And if choice is null, right, if it's equal to nothing, we're going to set it to the pound symbol. We can set it to anything, but that's how I coded it. And we're going to, again, call the switchboard function. This is our main navigation engine to walk around and do different things in the game. Okay? Got that? Now, in the introduction, when we start the game, remember we had added a sound player object, so it's going to play a sound, and it's going to take our picture box, and it's going to change the image in the form. And also when we load the game, we load it up at first. we're playing a sound effect. And eventually we'll add some environment or ambient sounds in as the player walks, from location to location on the dungeon map in the game. But if I want to run it now, okay. All right, so here's the introduction, and I'm going to click on Go. And, my inventory items, my magic abilities. And when we finish, they won't start the game. None of this will be on the interface. They have to work for it. They have to earn it, right? They have to, fight battles and gain combat experience. And then they might find a spell scroll for fireballs or ice blast or lightning. But only after they work for it. Yeah? They might level up eventually and find new weapons, more powerful weapons, or, armor with greater defensive capabilities, and so forth. But we haven't got there yet. Right now it's just basically an empty interface, okay? So I click Go. And as they walk around the game, we're going to eventually do some vector graphics and generate a map. Right now this is just a JPEG file I'm displaying in this picture box. And then we can change the view. So we could use a combination of, say, vector graphics and drawing methods, as well as, display JPEGs and PNG files as they walk around the map. Again, it's a very simplistic game. But remember, this is PowerShell here. It wasn't even created for this. We're doing things with PowerShell it was never designed for. Just for fun, just for the sake of learning the language, right? It's just fun, right? Introduction, you awake from what appears to be a disturbing dream, knowing neither, yada, yada, yada. We set the scene, right? A dark and stormy night. And, I click on Go. And so here we're at our starting location, Center 1, right? Describe scenery and environment. Now I can use my navigation buttons now. Remember what they do? So I can go north. That's North 1. And then I can go west. I see trees. East, I see a wall. Okay? I can go back south to Center 1. I can go south again to South 1. And if I look around west, I see dirt. East, I see rocks. Not very interesting yet, but we're just getting started. Oh my gosh, guys. There's thousands of lines of code to add and so much more for this game. But, one bite at a time, right? We can't do it all in one video. We can't do it all at once. Okay, I'm going to go west. There I'm in West 1, right? And I can look north, I see a village. I can look south, I see smoking ruins. I'm going to go back east, back to Center 1. I'm going to go east again. Now I'm in East 1, right? I look north, I see a small pond. I look south, I see tall grass. I'm going to go west to go back to Center 1. All right, so does that give you an idea of how the navigation would work in this game? Hope so. I hope that was fairly straightforward. So those are just some of the changes. Some of the changes to our RPG game. So let's take a look at this code and walk through the process, actually walk through the program flow of an event-based program using a graphical interface in PowerShell. So we'll try to think like the computer does, okay? So what happens first? Well, we've defined all of these Windows form objects here, right? These are definitions of Windows form type objects. We'll scroll all the way to the top here. We'll start at the beginning. So here's our main form. That's the actual window itself that we're going to open, right? And we've got our labels, we've got our group boxes, our text boxes, our buttons, list boxes, you name it. All those things that we need to use in the game. We had to code all those components first. Once we've done that, we've got to actually add them to the form. So here we add all those items to our group boxes. And then here we add all those group boxes and a few other things to the form itself. Now we're ready. Well, almost ready. We also have to code, right, the event handlers, okay? So they listen for the triggers, they listen for the events, and then based on what the player does, different items get triggered from that event handler method or function. It listens for that trigger. So all that loads, and then it plays the opening sound effect, just using a sound player object up here. It's declared, it's the thunder sound, okay? And then we need to load the form and display it. And in the past, we were using show dialog, which is traditional with C# and MFC apps. But in PowerShell, you may find this to be a more stable method of loading the graphical interface. I've noticed that I have issues sometimes when I'll run a GUI or load it using show dialog. Sometimes it'll lock up in PowerShell. Again, PowerShell was not designed for building games or providing rich graphical interfaces. PowerShell was designed to be a console programming language to control and manipulate things on the back end. It wasn't really designed for a front end, okay? So we're stretching it. We're doing things with it that we shouldn't do. We're kind of hacking it, you know what I'm saying? But isn't that the thing that we find fun, right? When we can kind of take something that was never designed to do something and make it do something it totally wasn't designed for, you know? Sort of like the Homebrew channel, you know, on Nintendo products. Or so anyway, this is a more stable means, and I'll blow that up really big. A more stable means of displaying your forms if you call system Windows forms application run and pass in the main form, okay? That being said, so we load the form and we're listening for events to happen. And the player sees, here, let's load the form. What do they see? Main output text will display here. A long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, it was a dark and stormy night. Well, where does that come from? Where on earth does that come from? And let me switch that back now. All right. Not search up there. Let's search down. All right. So that initial message, that's displayed in our main output text box. This happens at the initialization phase of the form. So the player doesn't have to do anything. This happens automatically when the form loads, right? Because we initialize the text to be that. See? A long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, it was a dark and stormy night. Same thing with the wolf image here, that JPEG. We don't have to do anything because it initializes to be that image. And I'll show you where that happens. Search down or up. Let me see. Yeah, so see when we set up that picture box, it's initially pointing to that wolf JPEG, and it loads it in a graphical interface. So no events have to happen for those things to happen. The sound effect and the image and the text, all that happens as soon as our form loads up. But then it's done doing things automatically. At that point, it's just going to sit there and it's going to wait for user input, right? So at this point now, the user has to do something. They have to click a button or select an item or change something in the game. And in this case, what they have to do is click the go button, all right? So they click the go button. When they do that, it triggers an event handler, which will then play a new sound effect, the wolf howl, and will then load this JPEG of a map. This is a dungeon map or the level map in the game, and it will change the text in this display box. So let's go see that. Let's follow that through, okay, and see how that looks or how that works. So if we follow that through in the code, what's happening is after the form loads and all those initial events happen, it's just sitting there, it's waiting now for a particular trigger. It's listening, okay, for something to happen. And that is the player clicking the go button. When the player finally does it, and they react and they click the go button, it's then going to go call the function go action, okay? And what does that do? Let's go up and actually, there, okay. So let's search up for go action. So they click the go button, and then that event handler maps it to this function, go action. What does it do? It takes whatever is in the text main input. And that's that little text box beneath the text main output, right? There's a text box that's main output. That's the main output text. And there's a little tiny text box underneath it called main input. And that text box is used for the player can type things in and talk with non-player characters, NPCs, and make choices on their inventory items and just do different things in the game. It's their way of interacting with the game. Their primary means of typing in input is through this TB_main_input. Okay? So we want to get the text, whatever text is typed there, Because this go button is a multi-purpose button. It's not just used to proceed in the game, but it's used to do all sorts of things, okay? Anyway, at this point, we get it, and if there's nothing there, well, we'd set it to be the pound symbol, okay? And then we call the switchboard. And remember, switchboard, it's sort of our main game loop, right? It's sort of the game engine, the navigation engine inside the game. It's just a switch statement and this function called switchboard. And we manipulate it and control it by changing these values, these constants. And based on those values, they call functions which that allows the player to walk into different locations. Well, if you look, the starting value of this global location is actually introduction. And let me go find that real quick. Make sure we search down introduction. Okay, so here it is being called from our switchboard. Here's the function. What happens in that function? There's a string, this message text. It displays that in the main text box. It changes the picture, right? So it changes it from the wolf to this is our JPEG with the map. And then it instantiates a new sound player class object and plays it. There's our wolfhowl.wave file. And it sets the global value of location to be C1. So the real starting location of the player is in the center of the map, right? The center of the dungeon, C1, okay? But how do we get to this introduction here, okay? How do we get to, the start of introduction? We initialize, when we create our global, notice the initial value that we give it, intro, right? Remember, we keep calling switchboard every time we click the go action button, we call switchboard. Well, the initial value's intro up here. And so therefore, in our switch, look what gets called, introduction, because the value of the global location that we switch on is intro. So we call introduction. Introduction displays the text, loads the new image, and plays the new sound effect, and then sets the location to C1. Now they can use the navigation buttons and walk around the game. And now they can click go and interact with the game. And then based on that, what happens? Well, let's jump back way down here to our event handlers. Right? And our event handlers, we have B north, south, east, and west. There's our navigation buttons. They go and they call this event handler method navigate action. And if I search up and we go to navigate action, looky here. It calls switchboard. All right? Based on them clicking that. Well, when they click that, it manipulates the value of choice, right? Way down here, look. We're setting choice to north, south, east, or west before we call our navigation function. And then we call switchboard. So what happens? Well, based on that, okay, north, south, east, west, we call switchboard. And then here we're just going to call different methods or different functions. Again, let's scroll down, right? Choice becomes north, south, east, west. If they click those buttons, right, that's the event handler listens on those buttons. Let's go search up here. So it calls switchboard. Sorry, somebody was calling my phone there. So it calls switchboard, and switchboard is going to switch on location, all right? And if they're in C1, it depends on what we change that value to. When we, whatever we change the value of this global location with. So we're in introduction, it becomes C1. They start out and they find themselves in center 1. So in center 1, what happens? Well, now we're switching on choice. And if they're in location center 1 and they click the north button, what happens? These are the different, character values that we set with those navigation buttons. And once we hear that character value, we see that character value, we change the value of the global location to to match. So if they want to go north, they go to north 1. But if they were already in north 1, that would be north 2. It's relative, right? If they want to go south and they're in center 1, we change location to S1. But if they were already in south 1 and they go south, then it would be south 2. So we're going to have to code these options differently for each function based on our map, right? The values are all going to change correspondingly to how you design your dungeon map. But ultimately, what you want to do, you want to change the value of the global choice, that string. Then you want to change the value of location. And if it is a choice that allows them to leave that room in your dungeon and go into another room or another location on the map, you want to call switchboard every time. And that takes care of navigating them to the next function in the game, right? So I'm in center 1. Let's say I click the north button, changes to north 1. I call switchboard. Well, what does switchboard do? I click north 1. If the value is in 1, now it calls the north 1 function. Okay? So I'm in north 1. What happens? If I go north again, puts me in N2 and calls switchboard. But if I go south, I'm in north 1 already. If I go south, I go back to center 1, right? I don't go to south 1. I go back where I came from, which was center 1. So you have to think, when you code this, it helps to draw it out on paper or sketch it out with some graphics tool like Visio or something. Have a map, and that map will help you code the navigation. Because based on the location and where the player is, you have to code the switch options differently for each function, for each map, or room on the map or location on the map. They're going to change. It's relative to the player's position. They're not absolute values. They're relative and they change based on where the player is and where they're going. You understand? Okay? So in this case, I've stubbed these out because I haven't gotten around to coding them yet and adding other maps. But so it's just if they go east or west, hey, they see a wall, they see trees, dead end. But I don't call switchboard because I haven't got around to coding these areas on the map yet. I'll have to develop those later. And that's what you want to do as you code. If there are certain areas that you haven't got to yet, just kind of stub them out. And the way you do that is you simply don't call switchboard. And you don't change the value of location. So you hold them there, you keep them there in a holding pattern in that function, in that location, in that room on the map, until they actually choose an option that allows them to leave and navigate to another location. If that makes sense, okay? Same thing for south 1, and the same thing for east 1 and west 1, okay? So again, how does that look? How does that work? Let's right? Everything loads and initializes up front. There's our sound effect, there's our picture file, here's our text. The player clicks go. That's the introduction function, the second sound effect, the second JPEG loads. Here's more text. I'm going to click go again, and that's where I appear at the starting location on my map. And now I'm going to navigate. North, south, south, north, west, east, east. Okay?